So let's start with pharmacokinetics. So what's pharmacokinetics? This is what the body does to the drug, what our body does to the drug. And it's all about movement and concentration of that drug over time. And when we look at what goes into pharmacokinetics, so I think of ADME. So A for absorption, which is how the drug gets into the bloodstream, either as oral medication or as IV, intramuscular, inhale, maybe sublingual or transdermal route. And the D is distribution. So this is where it goes in the body. So when we give the drug, it's limited to the plasma or as it spread all the way to tissue. And as we go to see later, if you give a drug and that drug is limited to the plasma, that means that drug has a very low volume of distribution. And the M there is metabolism, which is how it's chemically changed, and mostly by the liver, by the cytochrome P450 enzyme. And the last one there, which is the E. E is excretion, which is how it leaves the body, either through the kidney, the bowel, or through the lungs. So now let's focus on bioavailability. So what's bioavailability? So bioavailability is that fraction or that percentage of an administered drug dose that reaches the systemic circulation unchanged. So that fraction of that drug that you administer that reach the systemic circulation unchanged is what we call bioavailability. And as you're going to expect, if you give a medication through intravenous, because you're giving it directly into the vasculature, into the plasma, that means the bioavailability of that drug is going to be 100%. And we normally represent bioavailability by F. So F equals 1. So 100% means 1. And a while, because like we mentioned, the drug goes directly into the bloodstream. As opposed to non-IV routes like oral medication, intramuscular, sublingual, transdermal, those or subcutaneous, those the bioavailability of those medications, they are usually less than what 100%. And why? Due to loss that occurs during the first pass metabolism. So like we mentioned, so for oral drugs, the bioavailability is reduced because the drug passes through they have to pass through the intestinal wall and they have to pass through the liver via the portal circulation before they get into the systemic circulation. And by passing through these areas, that's going to start that will start the metabolism of those medication. So at the end of the day, less than 100% is going to end up in the systemic circulation. So now let's talk about first pass metabolism or first pass effect. So what's first pass metabolism? So first pass metabolism is the metabolism of a drug in the intestinal wall and liver before it reaches systemic circulation. And this results in decreased bioavailability. And this usually happens after oral administration and occurs before the drug reaches the systemic circulation. And like we mentioned earlier, if you give your oral drugs, they go into the intestine, and in the intestinal wall, we start metabolism there. From there, they go into the portal vein and into the liver, and there's additional metabolism there. So at the end of the day, what gets into systemic circulation is going to be low, it's going to be decreased. And this first pass metabolism is affected by the liver disease. It could be affected by liver disease, enzyme induction or inhibition, because if any medication, if there's something that is inducing all those cytochrome P450 in the liver, that will increase the metabolism of those medication. Also gut motility, that will also affect those that will also affect the first pass metabolism. So why does this matter? So because it can decrease the bioavailability. Yep, your first pass metabolism is going to decrease bioavailability. It requires higher oral doses, because if the first pass metabolism is high, that means you might have to give a lot of those oral medication so that you can get your desired concentration that you want in the circulation. And this causes large oral IV dose differences. And then lastly, it can lead to inter-patient variability, because maybe the oral medication that is required for this patient might be different from the one that might be required for the other patient, depending on what their first pass metabolism looks like. And a drug with high first pass metabolism, what are the examples of those drugs? Nitroglycerin. So that's why mostly we give nitroglycerin either as a sublingual or as intravenous or as transdermal, right? We don't give nitroglycerin as pill medication. Other medications there include the Propranolol, Morphine, lidocaine, and verapamil. And that's why these medications are often not given orally. And if you have to give them orally, you have to give them higher. They will need high oral doses. So, first pass metabolism could be bypassed, right? If you're given the medication through the IV, you can bypass the first part metabolism if you give it as a sublingual or if you give it as a transdermal. And let's look at the route of administration with better bioavailability. So your first one there is going to be IV, followed by intramuscular, followed by subcutaneous, and the last one is generally going to be your what? Your oral route, because that will have the lowest bioavailability. So let's look at the formula for bioavailability. And this formula comes from the graph, and whereby we look at the concentration of those medication in the plasma. So plasma concentration of those medication over time. So when you give those medication as an IV medication, so when we administer them as an IV, so that have to be our IV cough. And when we give it as oral medication, so over the time, like we said, it has to go through the intestine, then the liver. So you can see that the concentration starts to rise over what? Over time. So this area is going to be the area under the cuff for oral medication, right? So that's to be the area, we're going to call it area under the cuff for oral medication, whereby this area is going to be area under the cuff for IV medication. So when we look at our formula that we use for bioavailability, is going to be area under the cuff for oral medication divided by area under the cuff for IV medication multiplied by the dose in IV divided by oral dose. So like we mentioned, whereby AUC is area under the plasma concentration time curve, and the AUC reflects the total drug exposure or the extent of absorption. And if the dose of the IV that you are giving is the same thing as the dose of the oral, so both of them could cancel out each other, and then you can conclude that your bioavailability equals to the area under the curve for oral divided by area under the curve for IV. And if the bioavailability is 50%, so that means you will need to double your oral dose to be able to match an IV dose. So now let's do some questions together. So a patient receive a medication either orally or IV. So that the oral dose and the IV dose are the same. The area under the plasma concentration time curve, which is AUC, after oral administration is 40, while the AUC after the IV administration of the same drug is 100. So what's the bioavailability? Remember, like we mentioned earlier, if the dose are the same thing, then our bioavailability is going to be area under the curve for oral and area under the curve for IV. And that's going to be equal to 40 divided by 100. And that will be 40%. So the answer there will be 40%. Let's look at the next question. So under the next question, a drug has hepatic extraction rate of 0.7. When given orally, a large portion of the drug is metabolized before reaching systemic circulation. Which of the following changes will most increase the bioavailability of this drug? So we can see here that this drug has a very high first pass metabolism. So because of that, a lot of that drug is not getting into what? Circulation. So if I want to increase the bioavailability of this drug, I can as well give the drug what? Intravenously. So administering the drug intravenously, that will help to increase our bioavailability. And the last question there, a 500 milligram oral dose of drug S is given to a patient. The resulting area under the curve after oral administration is 30. When the same patient receives 200 milligram IV dose, the area under the curve is 50. What is the bioavailability of that oral medicine? So as you can see there, the dose that we are giving is different. So that means we have to use our equation, right? So AUC oral divided by AUC IV multiplied by dose in IV divided by dose in oral. So when we are plotting our numbers, so AUC under the oral is going to be 30 divided by the dose, the AUC under the IV, which is what? Which is going to be our 50, multiplied by the dose of IV that we give. So the dose of IV that we give is what? Is 200, divided by the dose of the oral that we give, which is what? 500. So when we cancel out these, so this cancel out each other, and this cancel this. So 3 times 2 is going to be 6, and then 5 times 5 is going to be 25. And when we divide this by each other, and then you multiply by 100, because you have to multiply by 100 to give you your bioavailability percentage, because the answer is in the percent. So that will give us 24%. And then when you look through the option, the answer that is close to 24% is going to be what? 30%. So the best answer there will be what? Will be D. Thank you guys. We've come to the end of today's lecture. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. And I will see you guys in the next lecture. Bye for now.